My next guest is an Ohio-based writer and comedian who performs all over the United States and has performed in 46 of the 50 states. But aside from stand-up comedy, he has also released 5 books, including his latest novel, Just Carl, which is out now and available on Amazon.com and on the Steve Sabo website. Here he is, folks, the one and only Steve Sabo. Steve, what's up, man?
Hey, man. Glad to be on here. It's actually 6 books now. Just Carl's my 6th book.
Wow, 6.
Yeah.
That's crazy, man. And these have all been released since like COVID is when you started this, releasing books or publishing books.
Yeah. So, I've always been a writer. I've always written, but I've never really finished anything. I was one of those people that, I write a story here, I write this, and I never, I always had that imposter syndrome, never thought I was good enough to do it. But when COVID hit, I suddenly had way more time on my hands than I expected to, and said, I'm going to start pursuing this now, not knowing how long, we'd be out of commission as comedians. So I figured this would be the perfect time to do it. And man, once I really started doing it, I just kind of got addicted to it, and I haven't stopped.
Yeah, man, there's a lot of positives that came out of that COVID time period. And one of them was having that time and being able to get to things that you always wanted to get. I remember there was people learning how to bake bread, and there was people doing all these crazy things, like these different types of hobbies, things that they never thought that they could do or wanted to do. And I think a lot of creative people and a lot of my comedy friends all kind of, were working on the craft, whether they started turning into like the Zoom shows and all that whole era. But also the writing and whether it was writing, sitcoms or film scripts or in novels. So I think it's pretty, if you're looking for positives that came out of that craziness of COVID time, it was that. And you're an example of this because it got you using those muscles and kind of writing and getting into that habit.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And comedy is a completely different style of writing. And that's one of the things that I've had people go, say it all the time, like, oh, you're a writer, then, comedy writing should be easy for you. And it's like, it's not the same thing at all. It's a completely different muscle. But, I've written all kinds of different things. I was a journalist, when I first got out of college. So I've done all kinds of different types of writing. And, but yeah, I love it all. So it's all good.
Yeah. And it's your versatility shows in your books that you've put out there. Not only, your comedy writing, you do stand-up comedy, and people should check you out.
Here's my theory. I think we, as a society, lose about 90% of our skill set with every generation that passes. Does that make sense to you guys? It's like my grandfather was an amazing person. He came to this country from Hungary at 7 years old. He didn't speak the language, taught himself the language, taught himself 4 more languages, started his own business, an amazing person. My dad did 4 tours of Vietnam. When he got back, sure, absolutely. When he got back, he had 3 jobs until he retired at 69 years old. After he retired, he single-handedly built an addition on his house. He still makes his own wine, still makes his own maple syrup, an amazing person. When I'm not doing comedy, I spend a majority of my free time watching Netflix.
I think the first book that you did was How to Fail at Stand Up, right? And so it was like a how-to guide.
Okay, so my first book was actually Jester's Run, and that was a full-on novel, but it was about a stand-up comedian.
Right. Yeah.
So I really stuck close to home for that one. But it was an idea, it's kind of a weird science fiction kind of not autobiographical, but let's say it's a person that's adjacent to me, a very similar type person, involved in a kind of a crazy situation. And then my second book was How to Fail at Stand-Up Comedy. Now I started writing both of them at the same time. It's just that the other one came out first. And it's one of those weird things where the reason I wrote that book was I just started thinking about all the comedy books that were out there. And there's a lot of comedy books out there that tell you how to write. And there's a lot of comedy books out there that tell you about how to start a career, very vague, situations of how to do stand-up comedy in general. And then there even is a book or two on the business side, but there weren't any books out there that tell you about all the things that comedians are doing wrong. And most comedians are doing so many things wrong. And I know I've made tons of mistakes. So I figured, kind of what a fun experiment just to see if I contacted other bookers and club owners and comedians and other people like that and say, what's one thing that a comedian could do that would make you never want to work with that person again? And I kind of compiled all the information and added my own stuff. And it's more than just about the mistakes. It also gives you all the basics and stuff that you would need to know to be. So it's kind of an all-encompassing book, but it really does focus on the things to not do more than, standard things like, oh, move the mic stand out of the way or don't ignore the light and stuff like that.
Right, yeah, because there are a lot of faux pas within the stand-up culture and stand-up world that people might not know. I mean, like, dude, I gotta order you. I read a lot of the first and second chapters of most of your books, but I haven't really gotten into this one. But this is and I'm a student of comedy. I love it, the art
Mhm.
form. What would you say are your top five don'ts? Like, don't do this if you're starting comedy
Okay.
or
So
if you're
that's
in comedy. Yeah.
yeah. So that's I never really thought about it in a top five because I don't know that one and more has more power over the other because you do any of these things wrong, then you're doing something seriously wrong, right? But I would say like one would be don't have too much of an ego going into it, especially if you're approaching people that have more experience than you or people that have some power in the industry. I mean, if you're one of those people that come up and go, "I'm the best comic that's ever existed," you better back that up, and you can't. So it's better to go into something humble than to come in with a chip on your shoulder is what I would say. Because one of the things that made me go in the first place, write the book in the first place, I started off as kind of like a joke, but was I read an entire chapter called "Don't Fuck the Wait Staff," because so many comics I know have screwed up, working at a club from just getting involved, and it's not even just don't fuck the wait staff, but don't party too much with the wait staff. Don't be, acting thinking they're your best friends or anything like this, because creating that 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 dynamic with the staff can often get you booted from that club completely, and it causes lots of problems. And don't get too drunk. Don't get don't do drugs before stage. Dress appropriately. Don't go to this place wherever it is looking like you just rolled out of a gutter. You know, and then don't try to, like I say, don't try to bite off more than you can chew, as in don't tell people that you can feature if you've got 8 minutes of material. They're going to find out pretty quick that you can't. So, be humble enough to recognize where you are in the industry because you'll get there. You'll get there eventually, but trying to push yourself there before you're ready, that's just going to bite you in the ass. And let's see if I can come up with another one. I mean, because there's so many of them, but
I
mm,
think the ego is definitely a good one. I
yeah.
also, what do you think about comics especially you see this a lot of times with newer ones or even really old school comics, but they're always on, even
Oh
in the
yeah.
green room. Is
Yeah.
that a faux pas?
Oh, I'd say it definitely can be for sure. Like the problem with the problem comes in is that you've got these varying personalities in comedy. And a lot of comics are introverted people, but other comics are very, very, very extroverted people. And when those people start dominating the conversation and taking over everything, especially when they're dealing with people that have more experience and are more veterans, it can really be a turnoff. It can really push that person away. And that can cost you opportunities. If you're the one trying to make the headliner laugh or trying to constantly run material by in just like a normal conversation, that person doesn't want to take you on a road with them. That person doesn't want to, recommend you to a club because you're kind of being obnoxious.
So it's a lot of a lot of the social side of it is where the faux pas lie. Like what, like you said,
Yeah.
having a big ego, especially if you're new and you come in, and a lot, it's good to have confidence in all of that and a little swagger, but when it's the ego, when you think you're like the next coming of, name a great comedian, the next coming
Yeah.
of Carl, the next coming of Pryor.
Right.
And 9 out of 10 times, or 9.5 out of 10, they're probably not.
Right.
but also, like you said too, like just I think all of these are great rules, and everyone should listen to these. Especially like don't fuck the wait staff and all these types of things, which are all within the social parameters
Mhm.
of how to engage yourself, and even how you present yourself.
Right.
I'm huge with that, and you see that too. A lot of these younger comics, they think it's cool to come in looking disheveled or whatever, but you got to think about the audience, not the other comics in the back of the room that you're trying to make them think you're cool or whatever.
Yeah, I was always told when I first started doing comedy, I was always told, to try to dress one step better than the average audience member, because if you dress too nicely, then you're going to give off a bad vibe. It's going to be a little pretentious, depending on what your character might be on stage. But if you look like a bum, even if your act is about being a bum, then people just, they're going to be turned off just looking at you. They're going to be because the moment you walk up on stage, people are going to judge you. They're going to have their little judgments just based on what you're wearing, how you're approaching the stage, if you're smiling, if you're looking, making eye contact, those kind of things. And it's hard to get past those judgments, with your act. So you want your act to demonstrate confidence, or your look to demonstrate confidence, but not be overly showy. I mean, it's really kind of a tough balance to find. But if you look at most of the really good comedians, you'll see it. Like if you watch any kind of comedy special, with Bill Burr or even Jim Gaffigan or anybody like that, usually these guys, they're dressing nicely, not distractingly, but they're definitely not over the top with it either. So it's a comfortable look that you can see that person and not be distracted. Like when somebody has something weird going on, like they've got like a weird, crazy hat or something like that, the entire time the audience is looking at them going, "What's with that hat? What's going on with that hat?
Yeah.
What's that hat say? Why is he wearing that hat?" And you're not hearing the jokes. So you don't want that to happen either. And you don't want to try to come off as too jokey either, because I've seen that too, where somebody has like a comedy shirt with a joke on their shirt or something like that, and you're like going, calm down, buddy. You know what I mean? You
Right.
can you can tell the jokes into the microphone. We don't have to read them on his shirt.
Right. I remember just recently I was just watching some old stand-up stuff, and I was looking at Eddie Griffith,
Uh-huh.
his early Def Jam stuff. He was wearing this gigantic hat.
Right.
And like you
Right.
said, it just takes you away from it. Like what? All I kept thinking about was, man, that was like the '90s, and they wore hats like that. Like, yeah, I don't remember that style. That's all I was thinking.
Right.
But but yeah, you don't want to anything to distract from what you're talking about on stage.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, when you're writing something like this type of a book, obviously there's a lot of you know, weight that comes with it, because now you're, basically advising comedians, and you're a comedian.
Yeah.
What have you learned yourself while writing this? Like you must have, talking to all these club owners and stuff like that. Were there any epiphanies of, oh yeah, you know what, I've been doing this wrong?
So many, it's so many is that you start listening to these people's answer the questions about what would distract, and immediately you go, man, I did that. I did that. I did that. I did all those things. I mean, I pretty much most of the things, and if you read the book, you'll see I full on admit that, I'm guilty of most of these things, which is the reason why I thought writing the book, me personally writing that book makes more sense, because I don't like taking advice from somebody that really has no leg to stand on. You know what I mean? Like somebody that, I mean, like for example, using this as an example for myself, there was a period in time in my life where I went on stage and I drank a lot. I used to walk up on stage and I'd have a drink in my hand. One of my first jokes was about doing shots and stuff like this. Audiences would send me up shots, and I'd get shit faced. I'd get hammered, and then uh, all kinds of other bad things would happen. And all those things would affect me. And I got a call once from Ken Muller, and I don't think he's booking shows anymore. But there's a time in the Midwest when he was booking, some of the best clubs, like 8, 10 weeks of work. And he just called me up on the phone one day, and he goes, he's right clear. He goes, "Do you have a drinking problem?" And I go, "No, I just, sometimes I get out of control." And he goes, "I don't want you drinking at all anymore on any of my shows that I book you on. And if you do, not only will you never work for me again, but I'm gonna fly to wherever you are, and I'm gonna kill you." He's like, "I'm gonna flat out kill you." He's like, "You think I'm kidding? That's what I'm gonna do." I'm giving you this one chance right now. And I took it to heart, and like he was serious. Like he's, not a lot of people threaten to kill you in this business,
Right.
I mean, and mean it, and I think he could have meant it. So, yeah, there's a lot of things that I looking back on it, I realized all the mistakes I made, and there's other mistakes I made. Like one of my biggest mistakes that I made was wanting to be edgy and not thinking, in terms of how that might affect my bookings in the future. You know, my
Oh
goal
yeah.
was to be, I'm going to make the back of the room laugh, and I'm going to be tell all the stuff that other people are afraid to talk about, not looking at the fact that bookers go, he's funny, can't use him in my room, can't trust him in an audience,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know, and that really affected me, and it kind of painted me into a corner, comedy wise, where I can headline pretty much any one nighter across the country, and I can headline a lot of clubs, but I don't have the credits to get into some of the biggest clubs in the country, and that kind of stagnated my career in that sense.
Yeah, and that's a good point too, especially for a lot of aspiring comedians that are just starting out there too, because a lot of them they want to be Dave Chappelle right out of the
Mhm.
gates, or Dave Attel, or Bill Burr, where they want to be edgy and say off color comments, and be that guy, be that comic. But to your point, you don't realize that the club owner is not thinking in terms of your comedy. He's thinking in terms of, is this person going to draw? Who are they going to offend in this day and
Right.
age? What am I going to have to deal with? Like, is the juice worth the squeeze type of stuff?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the whole thing is it took me a really long time to understand that because I'd watch a lot of these comics that are getting work, and I didn't like them. They weren't my cup of tea. And I'm like going, well, this guy, yeah, like the audience is laughing, but these are boring jokes. These are, kind of plain, there's no edge to it. And I realized because that's what a lot of people want to see. And I mean, you can do, smart stuff. You can do stuff that pushes the boundary, but you have to know where that line is, and you still have to be understand that the bottom line is the club owner's job is to put asses in seats, and if your comedy is inhibiting that, that's not good.
Right. Yeah. No, that's good stuff. And I think guys like Ken Muller with that
Hmm.
kind of I think that came from the heart, if I'm not, if
Yeah,
I'm reading it right, where
yeah,
he and I think he's, one of those kind of angels, if you will, who helped you pivot.
yeah.
You know what I mean? And steered you in the right direction.
He really
And
did. Yeah,
and it's good to see you kind of passing the torch with to a legion of whoever buys your book, all these legions of comedians that could potentially read this and hopefully learn from this. And again, everyone should check it out. I'm definitely gonna check it out. How to fail at stand-up comedy, avoid the pitfalls that kill a comic's career. And I think that kind of book isn't definitely important. Because to your earlier point, you can read a lot of books or take classes or whatever on how to be a better comedian, stage presence, mic control, all those types of things. But they're forgetting the game within the game, the social
oh
side
yeah,
of things, and where, and the social side is a huge component. That's the networking and all
yeah.
that.
It absolutely is. And there's so many things that you just don't think about, because it should come naturally to a lot of people, but it doesn't, especially creative types. Because creative types, let's be honest, there's business types and there's creative types, and they usually don't overlap much. And comedy is show business. Show is only one third of comedy business. Business is the other, two thirds. And of the business aspect, the social is half of that business aspect. So like I was always afraid to, if I worked with a bigger comedian, to ask them, to help me out. I was always afraid to ask them to get me into a club and stuff like this because, I always wanted to earn my spot there. But the reality of it is that the people that have a foot in that door in most cases are the only ones that can get you in that door, because a lot of those club owners, they're too busy to watch tapes. They're too busy to even watch you when you show up there to do a guest set. So if you have somebody that's willing to vouch for you, that's going to go a long way. So if they're willing to take you to open for them, that's even better. And I didn't want to ask people to do that because I'm always afraid to ask people anything. I didn't want to, impose on anybody, but that's how this game works. And if you want that person to do that for you, you have to show up on time. You have to be professional. You have to do a good job. You have to stick to your time. You have to do all these things and not be a jerk. You have to be a decent person and not, not make that person not like you in general. So there's a lot of aspects to it. Like, people think that all you got to do is be funny, and that's such a small fraction of it.
Yeah, like you said, you got to remember the business side of it, and conduct yourself especially when you're off stage, conduct yourself like a business person would. You're selling your product, which is yourself. So you don't want to, like you said, you don't want to be fucking the staff, you don't want to be getting drunk, you don't want to be outside smoking weed or whatever, and then the owner goes out there and there's a cloud of weed around you. These aren't things that is a business you would do if you were in a actual business, like if you were like if selling something. Then I think a lot of comics got to realize that you are selling something. You're selling yourself.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And that's a really good point. Is, if you were working a 9 to 5 job, whatever it is, selling insurance or something like that, and you saw that insurance salesman outside getting high before he goes in, are you going to want to buy from that guy?
Exactly.
There's no way.
Exactly. And obviously you walk it and talk it and live it. 46 of 50 states.
Yeah.
Which are the 4 states that you haven't played yet?
Yeah, so it's interesting because obviously, I don't know if it's obvious, but Hawaii and Alaska, they're probably the hardest ones to get to, being that they're not continental. In the continental states, I haven't hit Maine yet, which is all the way up in that little corner. I've been so close so many times where, like, I don't even care. Like, I'll lose money to do it. I just want to do it. So
just get it off the list.
Yeah, if there's anybody that's listening to this that has a connection to do a show in Maine, let me know. I want to do it. And the other one, for some reason, is Utah. And I've been to Utah. I've watched comedy shows in Utah, but I have not performed there. So what I need to do, and I'm working on submitting for Dry Bar to get a special there. They film out of Utah. Hopefully they'll kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
That'd be huge.
Therein lies one of my problems there too, is that I've never been known as being a clean comedian, even though I can do clean shows, and I do clean shows all the time. I have a corporate show coming up this Thursday, and I did a corporate show last Saturday. And that's the thing, is that people, they see some of the stuff that you do online, or they see some, your reputation for other shows, and they don't recognize that there is a diversity in comedy, and that you can do multiple different types of sets and have multiple different types of material. Like, I've released 7 different comedy CDs. That's 7 hours worth of material. And for each comedy CD, I have at least 2 hours of material that didn't make it to that CD. So we're looking at 20 some hours worth of material. I can pull out a clean set without a problem.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what I need, to get across to people. And that's something I'm still struggling with myself at this point.
A lot of people don't know this, but back in the day, back before we had the welfare system that we have today, if you had a child that you could not afford to take care of, you could take that child, drop them off at a firehouse, and they would find that child a new family, no questions asked. 100% true. Even more interesting, you can still do that today, and it doesn't even have to be your child. That's the best part about it. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I do it 3-4 times a week. It's one of my favorite hobbies.
Well, I think you're definitely on the right track to kind of letting people know that, hey, I could play clean, dirty, whatever, however you want me, I could do it.
Yep.
You're a pro and a veteran of this thing. And yeah, I heard Alaska. I know somebody else, another comic, who is going to try to get all 50. And he recently, I think 2 years ago, conquered Alaska, and he said Alaska has a real comedy scene. Like, it's a good scene over there. He said there's a lot of good local comics and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I've heard some good things. There's a comedy festival. There's an Alaska Comedy Festival. I submitted to it right before COVID hit, and then obviously that didn't happen. That fell apart. And then there's what's that? There's a club up there that's pretty well known. Can't think of it right now, but that's another one I just need to get to. But it's one of those things where Alaska's such a beautiful place. I think a lot of people want to get there, and I think there's a lot of comics that want to cross it off the line. so it's not the easiest club, to get
To
into
get, yeah,
either.
right, right.
But you got to have goals.
Yeah, man. I think it's awesome. I think I would just love for me to visit all 50 states at least once, let alone perform there and all that stuff,
Yeah.
which I think is awesome. So have you been to have you played all the like legendary clubs? Like have you played like the store and then in LA and then New York, the cellar? Like do you is that another like side goal is to play all these kind of
Yeah, some of this
iconic?
I've done some of them. I haven't done all of them, and that was never really my goal. Like when I was younger, you have that goal of wanting to be on the Tonight Show or whatever like that. That kind of lost its luster a little bit,
Yeah.
and then there's a point where I really wanted to play the store. That was the most important thing for me. But then Mitzi's is gone, so it's not exactly the same as it would have been. So I think it's kind of important to constantly adjust your goals and to but have goals, right? But to have that thing to be passed at a New York City club is great. That's an amazing goal for anybody to have. And to you know wherever it is that you want to go or whatever it is you want to do, to play a theater, to a lot of the bigger comics was to play Madison Square Garden was their big goal. And so you got to have whatever that goal is, and you have to aim for that goal. Getting a Netflix special would be amazing for most comedians at this point in time. So it's important to have stuff and have some ideas in mind, but also not to limit yourself that you're only going to go for those things because other opportunities come up all the time. Like you don't know if you might get a writing job, you might get an acting job or something that pays really well and can open a lot more doors for you. So I always think that's important.
Yeah, yeah, and you definitely have a lot of weapons in the arsenal where you
Yeah,
could
I
perform
try.
stand up, clean, dirty. You have all this writing background, all this stuff going on, and then and now we're seeing like comedy is constantly evolving and changing. And like, what's your thoughts on like from like you in the beginning is it's all about getting to the clubs and
Right.
working the scene. Now you're seeing comedians kind of breaking through podcasts or they're breaking through TikTok and this sorts of thing. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I thought that might come up. I didn't focus enough on that in the book because when I wrote that book, it hadn't taken off like it has now. I think the pandemic really changed a lot of the dynamic of comedy, and I think that so I think I have a lot of thoughts. I think it's great that there's a lot of different avenues, different ways for people to be discovered and noticed. What I don't like are there's a lot of acts out there that aren't really comedians or they don't really have much of an act that are putting out these 10-second, 20-second, 30-second videos, uh, hitting the algorithms by doing whatever it is it takes, right, putting the right song in the background or doing whatever it takes to get noticed, and then they're being booked as headliners in these clubs and they can't deliver. And I think it's great. It's a great tool for the really talented, and I think it's a terrible tool for the less talented. And it's tough because you got people like me and others that have been into comedy for years, 20, 30 years, who may not be as good at social media and they're not going to get discovered where somebody that, you know, I don't know, shoved a kazoo up his ass and, all of a sudden they're headlining, the next comedy club. And it's very frustrating. And I think the problem comes in too is that when people come to those shows, and especially I've noticed a lot of this. I noticed that there's a lot of comics that will see like the Matt Rifes and or a lot of audiences will see a Matt Rife video and they go to a comedy club and thinking that's what comedy is now, is just people yelling stuff out and
Right.
then
Yeah.
that comic responding to them. So you got a lot of the heckle videos and stuff like that really kind of screws up the art of comedy in and of itself. Whereas, people come in and they go, oh, he's going to pick on me. Oh, he's going to pick on them. Or I can't wait for them to say something about this or that. And there are some comics that are great at it. Matt Rife is really good at crowd work. In fact, I think his crowd work special comes out today, if I'm not mistaken, on Netflix. I
Yeah.
haven't seen it, so I don't know if it's any good or not. But there are certain like Big J Okerson. Most of his act is talking to the audience, but what he's doing is he's got bits that he's already written that he incorporates in through audience interaction. And that's what a lot of these people don't understand. These are written comedy bits. He's not coming up with all that. Some of it is. Some of it is absolute improv because he's a master at it. He's great. But that's not the only thing that comedy is. A lot of comedy is pre-written material, jokes that have been told thousands of times, hundreds of times to different audiences. But I think it's changing the dynamic of comedy, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. I think it also affects the turnouts of clubs sometimes. I think there's sometimes an oversaturation of comedy where you can turn on the internet and get hundreds of thousands of hours of comedy at your fingertips. People don't want to pay $25 plus a 2-drink minimum to sit in a dark room and listen to a person talk for an hour, because we've also got attention deficit disorders now for everybody. So
Right, yeah.
sitting still is tough. So, it's tough. It just is.
It's weird when, like, whenever you see things evolve like this. Like, so, like, if you go back, you got, vaudeville to radio, radio to television, television into, movies or whatever. And then, comedy specials. And then all of a sudden Netflix's. And now here we are, YouTube, a lot of guys self-producing and putting out shows on YouTube and stuff like that. And to your point about the saturation, it does remind me with this influx of like the podcasts and the TikTokers and all. It reminds me of the 80s boom, where there's so many to choose from that like like you said, you start to see less and less people turning out to see it because they're seeing it
Right.
all the time. So just like waiting for the next kind of resurgence. I'm waiting for it to weed itself out because there's a lot of bad out there. I think there's more bad than good in the TikTok universe.
Yeah, I definitely think there is. And to your point about podcasts, that can be a problem too, because I know a lot of people that have discovered, people like Bert Kreischer through the podcasts and stuff like that. But they don't understand that Bert's been doing stand-up for 25 years. I mean,
right, yeah.
he was a known commodity before he even started this podcast. It's not that easy to start a podcast and get 100,000 followers or 1 million followers or anything like that. I mean, it's very difficult. And a lot of these comedians think that that's going to be their instant shot at fame. I'm going to start a podcast, and next thing you know, I'm headlining, the Riviera, but it just isn't going to be like that.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's a tough road, and it's always filled with challenges, and I think just like with COVID stuff like that, the comedian or creative people in general always find out ways, workarounds, how to
Mhm.
make it work for them, how to find the good within, So like in your point, that's when you got into writing all these novels, which I think is awesome. 6 books
Yeah.
since this
Thank you.
thing. I read a little bit because the chapters. I'm got to order these books, but I started to read Just Carl,
Uh-huh.
and that's a whole different tone
Oh
from
yeah.
comedy. This is serious stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Wh-
It's
Tell me
it's
about this book a
interesting.
little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's interesting to me because there are one of the things that people need to understand, and it's going to be very difficult for some people to understand, because they see my comedy show and then they read one of my books, they're going to go, well, that's not similar at all, and it's not supposed to be. There's going to be some comedic elements to each of my books. It's just natural because that's kind of who I am. But it's a way of making serious subjects a little, more fun to read, I guess. But what ends up happening is, like, if you I'm not sure if you're familiar with like Carl Hyacin. I'm not even sure how you say his name. And like Gregory McDonald, he wrote all the Fletch novels.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
Fletch.
if you read these books in places, they're laugh out loud funny. There's like a lot of funny stuff going on in these books, but their action, their adventure, their mystery, their whatever that subject is, and that's kind of how I try to put my books out there. So there's a lot of dark material in my books. There's a lot of each one of my books. One of my books is called My Dark Itch. It's about a stand-up comic who becomes a serial killer. I mean, that's pretty dark stuff. My book. Until the Blood Begins to Flow is a horror novel, like a straight up horror novel about a high school principal develops the ability to bring his dreams and nightmares to life. And he finally snaps and he just goes crazy and wreaks havoc on his high school. So a lot of dark stuff. Now, my newest one, Just Carl, I took a character that was in my first book, Jester's Run, and he made another appearance in my book, Kayla's Gone, and I brought him back for this third book. And the reason I did that is because it's one of those characters that I think I just grown. He's started to become like a part of me. Like he's nothing similar to who I am as a person, but he's kind of like an alter ego that I wish I could be in a way.
Right, right.
But he's going through a lot of the same types of things that I go through as a person, but he's an ex secret agent, I guess you would call it, government agent that that he retired, and a buddy of his or a person that saved his life runs into a situation where his niece disappears, calls this guy, asks him for help to bring her back home safely. So it's all about that guy trying to do his best to bring this girl home safely, and he's a little bit past his prime, and he doesn't have the same skills that he used to have, and but he obviously wants to do everything he can, to save this girl. And there's a lot of elements. And what I like about it is that it's a book that you can read, and it's a fast read. It's a thriller. It's something you could sit down and at the beach or wherever and really get involved in a page turner type book. And it's one of those books where it you read it from the beginning, and you don't need to read any of the other books. But if you read the other books, there's going to be little Easter eggs in there that bring you back to those other. Oh yeah, I remember that from that book, or oh, I
So they're
remember
all
that.
connected in the same world.
Yeah, so there's an interconnection where you could go back and read any of the books at any point in time and still get more out of each of those books each time. So it's fun. And every one of my books, except for the How to Fail at Stand-Up Comedy, of course, which is a nonfiction book, but they all have at least something that connects them to the others. A little touching on it, where you go, if you're reading it and you're paying attention, you're going to go, oh, I remember that. And I always thought that was kind of cool. Like Stephen King does a lot of that in his books, and other
Yeah.
authors do. And I've always thought that was kind of like a cool little element. So I
Yeah,
wanted
yeah.
to.
I think that's awesome. And I feel like yeah, like reading your stuff, I don't let me know if I'm right or wrong. It feels like Elmore Leonard kind of meets Patterson, James Patterson a little bit. Like it just
Okay.
has that kind of vibe where you could see where the funny is, the dark humor, but I think if it flows, like you said, like a Patterson where it's fun to read.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's cool. And with this one, it looks like you kind of delving into like this sex trafficking
Yeah.
investigation, which is
Yeah.
heavy stuff, especially this time. And I think it's good to bring awareness to that as well. I mean,
Yeah. So what I try to do in most of my books, or if not all of them, is to bring some sort of social issues into light and bring those elements into it. And yeah, it's tough. Writing about something like sex trafficking and things like that is really tough to do. And what I do a lot of research in it. Like one of the things that for all my books, I research the subjects that I talk about. And the biggest compliment I ever got was a scientist. My first book, Jester's Run, has a lot of science in it. There's a lot of gene splicing and things like that going on, and there's elements of pandemics and stuff because that's what was going on in the world at the time.
right, yeah,
And I had a scientist contact me, and they said, I read your book, and the one thing I can say is it's scientifically accurate. Everything you're talking about, there's it didn't distract me. And that's the thing is I want people to read the book that are in those fields and go, yeah, that's how that person would act. That's what that person would say. Um, but yeah, when you're dealing with something like human trafficking and other issues that are hot, not just hot button issues, but really tragic issues, very delicate issues. I talk about those things in my books for a lot of reasons, but because I think they're emotionally charged. And I think it kind of, you want to know as a reader in your head, you're going, oh no, what's going on? Oh my goodness, this is terrible. I don't, you don't want to be because you kind of put yourself into that situation or family members or friends or somebody and it brings it home on an emotional level and that's why I do it. But yeah, it's very difficult uh in my mind, and it's after I write them, I send them to a couple people to read, and I go, is this okay? I mean, can we talk about this? Or
right.
you know, and so far I haven't gotten any death threats. So
When you write about when you tackle some of these subjects and you're doing the research on it,
Mhm.
how does that affect you emotionally? Because like I know, as a writer myself, sometimes when you write, you get emotionally invested into this stuff, and so take me through that journey of you kind of, as you discover more and more where these missing people might be going and what their futures
Yeah.
and the research takes you. What does that do to you?
Yeah, it really does. It does take you to a dark place, and it gets tough. And the good thing for me is that I do have comedy as an outlet, you know. And I don't know that everybody would have that type of thing in their lives, but the fact that I can brush that off by getting up on stage and making strangers laugh is something that really helps me get out of that. But I think other people that have darkness inside them also and are dealing with dark issues, if just writing those issues out, helps getting it out. So I think that helps too, is that you do the research and it's dark and all that kind of stuff, but then you write it and then you try to come up with your characters working through those issues and coming out on a positive side of it. It kind of, to me, that kind of takes me out of that funk. It takes me out of that darkness because the character was able, to pull himself out of whatever that situation is.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's what I do too, man. Whatever you're feeling, you instill it into the character, and
Yeah,
then let the character deal with it, and it helps you deal with it.
it really does.
It's a beautiful thing when you think about it.
It's an amazing thing, and the process of writing, which I've always thought was really strange, is that what I didn't realize it is that people ask me, they'll go, so do you know what you're gonna write ahead of time? And it's like I have a rough outline, but the characters, when you're writing, they kind of take on their own lives, and it's weird because like you might know where you think it's gonna go, but then you don't. It ends up in different places because the character made it go there, and explaining that to somebody that's not in it, they're like, well, you're the one that's leading that train. I go, but I'm not, I'm just, my fingers are typing, but my brain, is in character mode now. The characters is the one doing the thoughts and doing the actions and taking it in whatever angle it's going. And
That's so
it's
true, man.
it's amazing. It's a process I never thought made sense until I was doing it. But I love it, and so far I've never been backed into a corner where I couldn't get out.
Right? Yeah.
And I say that now. I don't want to say that because next thing you know, my next book I'm gonna be stumped for 3 years. But
Well, I'll knock on wood for you here.
right,
But no, I love that too as a writer when the characters take over and yeah, to your point, people who don't write or maybe don't think like how we think, but don't quite understand that. Because I know a lot of writers, they'll write with an outline and they'll kind of stick to the outline and stick to the bullet points. For me, I'm more freestyle. Like I'll get in, I know where I want it to be. Like let's
right.
say I'm talking about a comedian, he's on stage and then and he's has some kind of issue and then all of a sudden the characters and then I'll add a new character that comes in and then
Yeah.
next thing you know, you got this whole thing laying out and it's in real time. It's like your own chat GBT in your brain.
No, it really is. And what I thought was interesting in the process is that I'll write a first draft, and usually my first draft I get out fairly quickly, and I'll write the first draft. But between the first draft and the second draft, the story changes, and it might be a whole new element added. And by the time, like, this last story probably had 8, 10, 12 drafts because I kept adding characters or deleting characters or changing angles or switching this chapter around, which changes the whole story. And it's so crazy because if I told you what my story, my next novel is going to be today, versus when it comes out, it'll be a completely different story.
Right, right. Yeah. I mean, and that's what I love about it, about writing and just being creative in general is you start at a certain starting point, but you don't know how it's going to end. Like I remember this one writer says that he never starts a story without a title. And I was like, how
Mm.
can you do that? How do you know what it's going to be yet? Like I usually put the title at the end, like when I'm done.
Right.
So it's a very strange. Everyone's got, I guess, different approaches towards it, but yeah,
Yeah.
man.
That's funny you say that about the title because this was the first book. Well, I think technically my second book. My first, How to Fail at Stand-Up Comedy. I knew that was going to be the title because that was the premise going in.
Right, yeah,
But this book, I knew the title before I started it. And the reason why was only because it's a catchphrase. That phrase is an important element of the book Kayla's Gone. So it's used over and over in that book, and it was just kind of like a nod to the people that read that book to know, oh, this must be somehow related to that book because of this title. Um, and it really has nothing to do with the story whatsoever. The title doesn't reflect the story. It just reflects an element of the character, right? But all my other stories, the title's one of the hardest things in the world. Like I'll come up with a title and then I'll Google that title and check, Amazon and somebody else has that title. So you come up with another title and somebody else has a title. And it's kind of like making a password on your computer. It's like
Right.
everybody's you go, how about I'll put Steve Sabo as my password. That's already been used. Steve Sabo 627 already been used. Like, oh, oh. But that's where I come up with certain titles, and then later, afterwards, you realize that even that title isn't a great title. Like, uh, I came up with the title "My Dark Itch," and the itch being, his need to kill something that's the itch that he feels. But looking at the title now, "My Dark Itch," I joke around on stage when I talk about it. I go, "It's not about my battle with crabs," because that's what it kind of sounds like.
Right.
Even until the blood begins to flow, it sounds like it's a manual on teenage girls going through the change. It's like, oh,
That's
I got to figure it
hilarious.
out. Titles are hard.
Yeah, that was uh definitely difficult. Like you said, there's so many things out there. Uh um so like when you're writing this many books and since the COVID, like I guess since 2019 or 2020, you've been kind of
Mhm.
pushing these out. What's your time management like? How do you find the time to write these novels, and then, different drafts of them, so you're going
Yeah,
through it, and then also pursue comedy, family, all
yeah,
that fun stuff? How do you like take me through that? Because I would love some pointers on that.
yeah. So that's a really good point and a really good thing. And I joke about this on stage also. I don't have a wife. I don't have kids. I don't even, I don't have anything. And, as far as a family life goes. So I tell people that I go, you can get a lot of shit done when you're not getting laid. But um, it does. It takes up a lot of your time, so much of your time. And what I do is I've always been very disciplined in the sense that, and this is what I think, this works for anything in life. If you want to start something, I talk to people all the time and they go, "Oh, I really want to do this, but I don't have the time. I really want to do this, but I don't have the time." You're never going to have the time. You don't have the time. You have to make that time. So instead of, saying, "I'm going to exercise today," you have to set in your schedule, "I'm going to exercise from 10 to 10:30." You have to have that set. And when I'm writing, when I started doing my first novel, I said every day from 11 a.m. until noon, I'm going to write. Now I can write any other times. I can write before, I can write after, but I have to write during that hour. Nothing else can distract me. I'll put my phone away, I'll do whatever, and just spend that 1 hour doing it. Because I figure my theory is, and this is for anything in life also, is you can do anything for an hour. Anything in the world you can do for an hour.
Yeah.
And if you get in the habit of doing that for an hour, eventually that, whatever that is, gets done, whatever it is. So, and it's one of those weird things. And once you start seeing progress going, like when you're writing a book and you write 7 pages, it doesn't feel like much. You write 30 pages, it doesn't feel like much. But a week and a half later, you've got 100 pages. All of a sudden, you're like, oh, I'm accomplishing something. Something's actually happening here. So then you start looking forward to doing it every day and doing it. The hardest parts is once you got a first draft and a second draft and a third draft is going back to that same story over and over and over again and making minute changes or major changes or finding something in there that you hate that you don't know how to fix. That's the hardest part. And that's the hard part to motivate yourself to do. But more to your question is, what do I do personally is I'm on the road every week, between 2 and 5 days a week. But every day that I'm not on the road, I'm at my computer writing for hours a day. And if I can drive, if it's a gig that I drive there and drive back from, and I do, if I have gigs that are under 3 hours away, I usually drive home afterwards. I'll get up in the morning and I'll write in the morning and I'll keep writing. But I do every single day that I am home in my apartment, I will write every single day, at least an hour. And I think that's what, and again, it's for anything. It works for anything, whether you're writing or painting or sculpting or baking bread or whatever it is you're doing, exercising. If you just put that time, you have to. It's not about saying you're going to do something. It's setting an exact time to do that exact thing every day that you're going to do it. If it's 1 day a week or 2 days a week, I'll tell people, start by doing it 1 hour a week, right?
Right.
So Sunday from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m., whatever it is. And you work your schedule around that. If somebody asks you to do something, I can't do it that day, I'm writing, I can do it afterwards, or I can do something before.
Right.
But you have to stick to that schedule, or because the moment that you don't, it throws everything into chaos and you'll never complete stuff. But if you can stick to a schedule, and that's everybody, like, we talk about everybody has ADHD and all this kind of stuff. It doesn't matter. And it's whether it comes for comedy writing. There's a lot of people that do comedy writing. They'll sit down every day and write every day. And not everything that you write that day is going to be good. You might do an entire day and have none of it be worthwhile. That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if what you write is good. What matters is that you're doing the process of writing. And in that process, some of it will be good, and that's what you really need to do. It's discipline.
Consistent persistence.
Absolutely. There's nothing that I will emphasize more than if you do something enough, you will be good at it. I mean, look at Malcolm Gladwell has that book about 10,000 hours.
Yeah.
I agree with that. What was that? Which book is that? Is that,
I forget the name of the book, but
I think it's The Tipping Point, but whichever one it is, I've read all his books. They're great. I recommend everybody to read those books because they're fantastic books. But if you do 10,000 hours of anything, you will become an expert in that field. You don't have to be good at it right now. Eventually you will be. That's just how it works.
Right on, man. That's good advice. Consistent, persistent. Just do it. Just get in the habit and just do it every day. Make it part of your daily thing. And like you said, then it becomes once it becomes a habit, then it's locked in. Once you miss it when you're not doing it, that's when you're locked in. When do the ideas start flowing? Like you got the 3 hour drive. Is your mind just building storylines while you're driving and recording it onto a tape recorder or something?
That's a really good question too. That's how I do most of my jokes, is when I do most of my joke writing when I'm driving. And it's interesting because as far as my book stuff goes, every once in a while I'll get some of those ideas while I'm driving, but most of the time I'll wake up with an aspect to my book. And I don't know why. It's like I think I go to bed thinking about it, and then my brain's working overnight, and I'll wake up with, oh, this is what he should do. This is where he should go. This is what I need to do with this. Sometimes the ideas, they can come in any space, but if you're taking a shower, if you're anything where you're not thinking about that thing, that's when those thoughts pop into your head. But yeah, a lot of times for writing, it's usually strangely it is when I'm driving, and sometimes I do ridiculous drives. Like this past weekend, I was in Kansas, and it was a 12-hour drive home from Kansas, and there's a lot of time to do a lot of thinking, and yeah, that's usually when, the really dark, and often hilarious jokes will pop into your head.
With all these books, are you self-published, or are you trying to get a publisher? Do you have one? Like what's your goals with all these novels now? I know they're doing great on Amazon in your own right, but is there a next step you want to get these to?
Yeah, so that's a really tough question because I don't know, honestly. So for my first novel, I spent a lot of time trying to get it published, trying to get even to get a literary agent interested in you. And one of the problems that come in, this is the same thing that you have with anything, is in order to get something, you already have to have done something. And like they didn't really want to look at it because I didn't really have a pedigree for it. And I sent probably 100 different inquiries out. Most of them didn't even get read. They didn't even say it. And I was getting a lot of feedback where they were saying like, just where the United States is at this point. I could show you a list of like all these rejections that say we're looking for women authors or gay authors or people of color right now. And I'm just an old white guy,
Right.
and they didn't want to even look at what I had to offer. And
Wow.
which is sad, but in the same sense, 10 years ago, none of those people would have had opportunities. So I can't be mad at other people getting opportunities. It just kind of sucks that it kind of gets in the way of my opportunity.
Yeah.
I did talk to a couple publishers for the first one, and the unfortunate part, the state of publishing right now isn't good. You, People aren't reading like they used to a million years ago. And if there's, I did some research on, they said the average book sells like 250 copies in its lifetime, which isn't good. So when they're offering you a book deal a lot on the smaller publishers, because basically I think there's five major publishers in the United States, and it's very hard to get in with those five publishers. I mean, it's extremely hard. You
Right.
kind of
Right.
have to start on a small press scale, one of the smaller publishers. The problem with the smaller publishers, they can't guarantee any placement in bookstores or anywhere where you could get independent people to just stumble upon your book, which makes it difficult. And the deals that they're going to offer you is very small. Like I think the one deal I was offered was like a $1,200 payment, and then after my book sold, I think I had to sell 2,000 copies before I would get like pennies for each copy that sold after that. Well, I have to
Wow.
sell 10 times as many copies as the average book sells before I make, more than $1,000. And that's a lot of work you put into these books to only, get $1,000. And I'm being told that sometimes that's a pretty good deal for some of these publishers. Some publishers don't even offer anything. So I
Wow.
decided to go the self-publishing route, and I found that and Amazon takes a huge chunk of your money. They a huge chunk. But when it comes to something like How to Fail at Stand-Up Comedy, I sold several thousand copies of that book already, and it does well every month. And so by going the self-publishing route, that was definitely a better financial venture for me. It's just getting the word out on these other books. So right now I'm doing the self-publishing because I have shows and I can sell them at the venues that I go to, and make more of a profit that way. But it also doesn't get me, into the bookstores and the other places that you really want to. Like, 'cause I think the thing that I always said when I first started out, if I could be in an airport, walk by and see my book in the window, that would be the greatest feeling in the world for me.
Yeah.
But
And
it's almost
but
impossible.
as a local Ohioan,
Mhm.
when the airport's out there, maybe because I see it here. I'm in Long Island. When I
Mhm.
go to MacArthur Airport, which is Long Island Airport out here, they have local artists in the window.
Yeah.
Self-published people. So that would be cool if they would throw you a bone that way. The local,
Yeah.
or the local bookstores and all that kind of stuff. Just as an Ohio guy, you
Yeah,
know.
I have my books in the local bookstores around Toledo. They are here. Um, the independent sellers in the smaller places. I have not thought about approaching the airports and asking them. That's not a bad idea. I should, it would still be a great feeling to walk by and see it there,
It'd be huge, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, because people want to read books before they get on the plane. That'd be
Yeah.
like the best thing ever, man.
And why would they not want to support a homegrown talent, right?
Exactly, man. And I love Ohio, dude. It's a great place for comedy.
Mhm.
I know Mark. I don't know if you know Mark Riccadonna. He seems to know everybody.
Oh
So
yeah.
yeah, so
Yeah.
Mark's a good friend of mine. I do a lot of work with him, and he's always talking up the local Ohio scene over there. And yeah, so I'm looking forward to getting back out there soon.
Yeah,
But
I'm telling you, the Midwest is got some great comics. Great comics. Don't sleep on the Midwest. I mean, there was a time where everybody thought the best comics in the world were always in New York and in LA. And they are. Some of the best comics in the world are in New York and LA, but some of the worst comics in the world are also in New York and LA.
that's
So
true,
just because you're from New York or LA doesn't mean you're a great comic.
right?
And there's a lot of great comics in the Midwest, and one of the reasons why they're so good is just because there's a lot of places to do comedy out here within like a 10-hour radius. There's probably 100 clubs within a 10-hour radius of where I live right now. So get a lot of reps and a lot of different audiences in different places. Whereas like a lot of comics that are in New York or LA, they're kind of stuck in just that general area, doing clubs that are within a couple hour radius, and it doesn't really give them the same diversity and the ability to develop material that's universal like some other places do.
Yeah, right on, man. Yeah, you guys got Jonathan Winters, Bob Hope, Dave Chappelle. These are
Oh
all,
yeah.
yeah. You,
Uh,
what's his name?
Drew Carey,
Yeah, Drew Carey, of
uh,
course, Drew Carey.
Tim Allen's from Detroit.
Yeah,
Um, Phyllis Diller. Yeah.
yeah. You guys got some real deal legends over there. So yeah, it's a great thing. That's what we did with Rick and Donna. We did top five Ohio comedians, and we were just going through them all. And it was great, man. You got Arsenio Hall. It's from there.
Oh yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
Cat Williams. Is it Cat Williams? One of them. I think it might be Cat Williams. Might be from Ohio. I'm not 100%
Yeah,
on that.
he might have been Matt Rife, originally from Ohio.
Oh yeah,
There you go.
there
So
you go. And Steve Sabo is from Ohio.
and
So
Steve Sabo's from Ohio. Yeah.
dude, this has been awesome, man. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me about all this stuff. This has been great. I learned a lot of great stuff, and it was just awesome just picking your brain, talking to you, and tell everybody where they could find you, follow you, get your books, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, so I have my own website, stevesabo.com, STEVESABO.com. I'm also on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, just Steve Sabo. You can find me there. I think it's S Sabo Comic is my handle on Instagram and Facebook. But I also have a follow page, whatever, a comedian page on Facebook as well. You can get my books on Amazon if you know the search for them, or search me, search the titles of the books, or you can get autographed copies of my books on my website. And you have to pay a little bit of shipping, but not as much as you would if you were buying it somewhere else. So yeah, I appreciate all that. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, man. Everybody check him out. All his books, great stuff. I'm going to get them all eventually, but How to Fail and Stand Up Comedy. I'm really want to get that one in the new book too, just Carl. So, yeah, man. Thanks so much. Steve Sabo, everybody.